She is the town's widely acknowledged outcast, living apart from others, never marrying and never having children. When she was 6 years old, her father's violent temper drove away the only person who ever truly loved her, her mother, leaving the young girl to struggle for survival under an unpredictable and brutal father. Fear became her constant companion, loneliness her closest neighbor, yet she was as resilient as marsh grass, surviving with stubborn strength. Her name is Kia, a girl raised by nature in the depths of the marsh. Because of her withdrawn personality, every time Kia went into town, she was met with hostile and judgmental stares. That day, she went to the grocery store to buy daily necessities, only to unexpectedly run into her ex-boyfriend Chase, and although she wanted to avoid trouble, he clung to her relentlessly.
Kaya, Clark. Wait, I want to talk to you. Don't act like that, come on.
Leave me alone.
Kia's indifference bruised his fragile pride, and the laughter of his companions behind him only fueled his anger, so he deliberately waited near places Kia often visited, planning to teach her a lesson, thinking magnanimously that as long as she showed weakness, he would let everything slide.
No, I feel sorry for you, but I want nothing to do with any of that.
But Kia refused to play along at all. However, he shoved Kia to the ground and tried to force himself on her. When she continued to resist, he struck her with a heavy punch, and in her dizzy haze, Kia grabbed a nearby stone. As he collapsed in pain, she kicked him several times in the stomach.
You bother me again, and I'll kill you!
A nearby fisherman witnessed the entire scene, but at the time, he did not take her words seriously. A fisherman nearby witnessed the entire scene and did not take her words seriously, until 2 days later, when the man's body was found in the marsh, having fallen from the lookout tower, with no fingerprints left at the scene. Yet because of the earlier conflict, Kia was immediately named the prime suspect. In an instant, the entire town applauded, and in addition to calling her a freak, they gave Kia another title, a cruel witch. After all, the deceased Chase was a well-known successful figure in town, with a beautiful wife, a happy family, and a solid reputation, his only flaw perhaps being his wandering nature. While Kia was merely a solitary marsh girl, people shouted for her to pay for a life with her own, and only one gray-haired lawyer reached out to help her.
They are going to judge you, whether they know you or not. But I can't help you unless I know you.
In exchange for his free legal defense, Kia hesitated briefly before choosing to reveal her past. When she was young, she once had a warm and loving home, where she played by the pond with her brothers and sisters, while her mother smiled softly and painted by the shore, though this happiness was always shattered by her father's sudden rages. Under the constant pressure of violence, her mother's face was often marked with bruises, and one day, taking advantage of her father being completely drunk again, she left in a daze with a suitcase, and never returned. Not long after, the remaining brothers and sisters began to flee one by one, each bearing shocking marks of harm on their bodies. Their departures took away what little joy Kia had, leaving behind endless loneliness and fear. Yet Kia did not try to stop them, instead speaking through tears. From the injuries of others, Kia learned how to survive with her father, which meant never appearing in front of him. Kia often rowed a small boat alone, drifting through the marsh where danger and life coexisted, and while the plants and animals became her closest companions, a rich inner world could not keep loneliness at bay. With a kind reminder from the grocery store owner, Kia learned that school offered friends her own age and even a free, delicious steak, which instantly tempted a girl long familiar with hunger and isolation. She gathered her courage, put on her mother's dress, and tried to present herself with dignity as she went to school, but what awaited her was pure hostility from her peers.
Where you been, Marsh hen? Where's your hat, swamp rat?
They mocked her for having lice, claimed she smelled strange, and poured cruelty on her without restraint, and the constant jeers made Kia unbearably uncomfortable, so she fled the school, making that her one and only day there. Later, Kia received a letter from her mother, and she ran desperately to her father, begging him to read it, but after glancing at it, he pulled out a lighter and burned it. She cried as she tried to extinguish the flames, but her father roughly dragged her aside.
She ain't never coming back. Hear me?
What he destroyed was not just a letter but all of her longing, and Kia could only gather the ashes of her memories, seal them in a bottle, while her father cursed and burned everything her mother had left behind, before one day disappearing as well. leaving Kia alone to fend for herself. Still a child, she taught herself how to harvest mussels and sold them to the grocery store owner to survive.
Mind you, others bring them too. So if you bring them, and I already got some, why, you just be out. It's first come, first serve. Ain't no other way of doing it.
That's fine. Thank you.
This was Kia's inner truth, because the survival rules taught by nature had never included mercy. To survive, she rose before dawn to dig for mussels and fell asleep at night to the white noise of the wild, with birds and animals as her companions and the perilous marsh as her home. And living apart from others, Kia gradually became the mysterious and dangerous marsh girl in the townspeople's mouths. One day, on a wooden post near her home, she found a white feather, which in the language of nature is a signal of courtship. The next day, at the same spot, she found another feather of a different color along with some daily supplies, and as Kia took out one of her treasured feathers to return the gesture, she unexpectedly ran into the gift giver. His name was Tate, and years earlier, the two had crossed paths once, when Kia lost her way in the marsh and Tate helped her find the road back home. Despite this connection, Kia remained highly cautious about his sudden kindness, until he offered to teach her how to read, and her hunger for knowledge melted the ice in her heart. Fairly speaking, Tate was a capable teacher, patient and steady, making learning engaging, and Kia was like a traveler lost in the desert who had finally found an oasis, tirelessly absorbing every kind of knowledge. After learning to read, she began to read books that broadened her horizons, greatly enriched her inner world, and eased her guard against the outside world. And being with Tate became her first step toward reconnecting with life beyond the marsh. Love added a touch of sweetness to Kia's once unchanging world, as they danced in forests filled with falling leaves and held each other by the shimmering sea. Yet just as migratory birds must leave, Kia believed she had found her destined refuge, until one day Tate suddenly told her that he was leaving to attend college far away. Kia struggled to accept it at first, but Tate comforted her, promising that he would return in a month and watch fireworks with her by the sea. Before leaving, he handed Kia a list of publishers and encouraged her to try submitting her work, because with her love for nature and her natural talent for drawing, Kia had accumulated countless sketches of marsh creatures, and her work had already reached a level worthy of publication. During the days of separation, Kia immersed herself in drawing to fight off loneliness, and when the promised date finally arrived, she put on her favorite dress and went to the shore early in the morning to wait for Tate. But she waited and waited, until the sun sank below the horizon and the heavy night extinguished the light of hope in her eyes. Yet he never appeared. The wounds of being abandoned in childhood revealed their ugly scars once again, and what broke Kia was not the separation itself, but the fact that she was always denied a proper farewell with those who mattered most. After realizing she had been abandoned again, she sank into a period of despair, until one morning she was awakened by clear birdsong, and following the sound to the beach, she found birds gathering around her, and just like before, nature used its invisible hands to soothe her wounds once more. In the days that followed, Kia poured her love for nature into her drawings and sent them to publishers, and before long, she received a sample copy along with a generous payment, freeing her from relying on digging mussels to survive, allowing her to pay off years of property taxes, bring electricity into her cabin, and buy new furniture. And at that moment, her soul no longer had to wander, as she finally claimed a true place of her own. In the 5th year after Tate left, another man entered her life, a man named Chase, a well-known wealthy heir in town. At first, Kia felt nothing toward him, until he casually picked up a shell and handed it to her.
Pectinornatus.
All right.
Well, it's unusual to find one here.
Whenever anything related to the marsh was mentioned, Kia's eyes would light up without her noticing.
There's something else, ain't you?
Chase was drawn to that sparkle and leaned in for a kiss, and Kia's response gave him great confidence, prompting him to push her down and try to go further, only to be forcefully pushed away.
I know you think I'm trash, but I'm worth more than a picnic.
Chase immediately chased after her to apologize, and to make up for his mistake, he took Kia to a lookout tower where the view was breathtaking and the entire marsh could be seen at a glance, and Kia was instantly drawn to the scene before her, because it revealed a side of the marsh she had never seen before, because she loved nature and extended that affection to everything connected to it. When Chase invited her to travel with him, she hesitated for a moment but still agreed, because even though she had stumbled more than once on the path of love, Kia still had the courage to try again. That night, the two stayed at a roadside motel, and after confirming their relationship, Kia turned the shell into a necklace and gave it to Chase. She could not clearly define what she felt for him, but this relationship helped her hold loneliness at bay, and that was enough for her, because all Kia sought was companionship, while Chase's true aim was control and possession. One day, he showed up uninvited at Kia's cabin, casually touching her furniture and looking down as he commented on her drawings, like a stray animal marking territory wherever it pleased. Yet the moment Kia showed discomfort, he immediately softened his attitude. In Chase's eyes, Kia was less a girlfriend than a target, and when friends asked what it felt like to be involved with the Marsh girl, he boasted smugly,
She's an animal. Why was the bobcat worth every bit of the gas money?
Tell me her eyes glow.
Only for me and only when I make.
These words were overheard by Tate, who had just returned after finishing his studies elsewhere, and already burdened with guilt. He immediately clashed with Chase. That night, Tate came to the cabin hoping to persuade Kia to leave that man, but before he could speak, a stone thrown in anger flew toward him.
You're the one who left me. Who didn't come back when you promised. Who never came back.
Tate hoped to reconcile and poured out the struggles he had endured over the years, and although Kia accepted his apology, she ultimately chose not to forgive him, because even if her feelings for Chase were not deep, she still wanted to hold on to the most basic sense of loyalty. However, the very next day, she ran into Chase in town, standing beside another girl his age.
Pleased to meet you, Kaya. I'm Chase's fiance.
Kia waited for him to say something, but Chase offered no explanation at all and simply turned away, and she fled back to the marsh as if escaping. As the pain of abandonment washed over her once again, before she could even react, Chase rushed over, still trying to argue his way out, but when he could not find Kia, his unease quickly turned into furious frustration.
Kyle! I know you're here, damn it!
He smashed Kia's cabin to pieces, leaving the inside in total disarray, yet he still refused to give up. Unable to find her, he returned again and again to cause trouble, using intimidation to force her into submission. Seeing him, Kia felt as if she were seeing the shadow of her father, dragged back into those days of living in endless fear, but she was no longer the helpless little girl she once was, and when faced with Chase's assault, she fought back with all her strength. After escaping from the beach, she did not dare return home and instead hid on the water overnight, and when Tate saw the injuries on her face, he wanted to confront the one responsible, but Kia firmly stopped him, choosing not to escalate the situation and instead leave town for a while. A week later, under the pointed stares of the townspeople, Kia boarded a bus to another city to meet with a publisher, and that evening, she and the editor talked late into the night.
One for mating, and one to attract a male in order to make him her next meal.
So she...
I don't know if there's a dark side to nature. Just inventive ways to endure. Against all odds.
After finalizing the details of her next book, Kia took the bus back to town the following day, and it was on the very day she was away that Chase fell from the lookout tower and died. As she pulled herself out of those memories, she heard the old lawyer urging her to appear pitiful to gain sympathy, but Kia firmly refused.
I mean, they laughed at me. They left me. They harassed me. They attacked me. You want me to beg for my life? I don't have it in me. I won't.
Kia would not beg for her life. What you see is who I am, and I will not argue against it. When the final judgment arrived, Kia lowered her head and quietly listened to Chase's mother accuse her.
She knew she couldn't have him anymore, so she killed him and took back
Objection,
my
no.
necklace.
Chase had been wearing the shell necklace before his death, yet it was not found on the body, and although Kia clearly had an alibi, this missing necklace became the key doubt used to accuse her of murder, until the old lawyer presented crucial evidence that the police had thoroughly searched the cabin and never found the shell necklace. In truth, the old lawyer was never certain he could clear Kia's name. He only hoped to do his best to wipe away the prejudice that had shadowed her for far too long.
The reality is that she was an abandoned child. A little girl surviving out there in the marsh on her own. And we labeled her and rejected her because we thought she was different.
What placed the charge of murder on Kia was never real evidence, but the bias and discrimination born from her being different. After 6 hours of intense deliberation, the jury finally reached its verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Catherine Danielle Clark, not guilty of first-degree murder of Mr. Chase Andrews.
Kia was released in court, and after surviving this ordeal, she reunited with Tate, and in the years that followed, the two lived together but never registered a marriage, because she believed their bond was like that of birds, where lifelong devotion is a natural instinct rather than something proven by paperwork. Later on, Kia published several books and rose to fame. After becoming well known, she contacted the brother who had been the last to leave home and finally learned the truth behind her mother's disappearance. It turned out that her mother had lived for years under the crushing weight of fear and violence, her mental state gradually falling apart, and she fled to her sisters simply to save herself. After her condition improved, she wrote that letter to Kia, hoping to bring the children back to her side, but she passed away before she could do so, after leukemia returned. Yet Kia had long since made peace with it, because she understood that everyone had been struggling in their own way, and she never blamed her mother. Much later, as Kia grew frail with age and sensed her time was nearing its end, she sailed her small boat into the depths of the marsh, and in a haze, she seemed to see her mother's figure, smiling as she emerged through the mist of time and came to Kia's side. After Kia passed away, Tate honored her wishes and donated those precious records and specimens to a laboratory. But when he opened the diary she had left behind, the sorrow in his eyes slowly turned into shock. The first half of the diary recorded every detail of Kia's life with him, until a hand-drawn image of two mantises facing each other suddenly appeared, followed by a portrait of Chase, and in the lower right corner of the next page, the missing shell necklace was clearly shown.
Fireflies, in fact, have two different light signals. One for mating, and one to attract a male in order to make him her next meal. I don't know if there's a dark side to nature, just inventive ways to endure against all odds.
Tate went to the beach and discarded the shell necklace. Kia belonged to this land, and this land would forever bury her secret. The film ends here. See you next time.